death.
You just heard Death Squad from Sacred Reich's Ignorance. This is the Thrash Extravaganza number 8. Sacred Reich Ignorance, 1987, Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. Shit, man. Here we are. Part 8.
Part 8.
It feels
the
like
week of Christmas.
Yeah. We're really cutting it close into the holidays. Sorry, we're a day late. Usually we've been releasing these on Mondays and stuff like that, but we had to kind of record a day later because it's holiday season, man. You guys understand. So
yeah, it's Christmas week. Like, yeah, you got stuff to do.
Hell, a lot of people probably won't even listen to this until after Christmas because they're probably busy, doing last minute shopping and shit like that.
Exactly.
But
don't buy through Amazon. Do your local guys. Come on.
I know.
Help some guys out and some ladies.
Yeah, if you need some, when people hear this, if you need some late Christmas gift artwork, Mark's your guy.
Yeah, if you'd like something in 2021, let me know.
Yeah, exactly. Or some Valentine's Day stuff, right? Or some
sure, anything, maybe something in May. That'd be great.
Yeah, exactly. Why May? Is that like a slow time for you usually?
No, just it's always good to have stuff further out.
Oh, I got you. Okay. I didn't know if like you man, that's impressive. I barely know what I'm doing next week. You're already thinking about May. That's good.
No, I'm only into February with booking stuff. So
with booking stuff. All right, cool. Don't forget too, something down the road, you get a paycheck to do the Prince Purple Rain cover for us.
It's on my list right now. That's awesome. The next thing I'm doing.
Yeah. So for those of you that are new to Requiem, Mark obviously does a lot of art and art commissions and things like that, but he has been for at least a decade and a half has been doing the cross-country shirts for us, and he takes a iconic album cover of some sort and does something with our theme, which our mascot is the Tigers, and so we're doing Purple Rain. So you did last year, you did what was when we did this year? Oh, Dave Bowie. Yeah. So that was cool.
Yep. Yeah, there was Van Halen the year before?
Yeah, Van Halen, Aerosmith. It goes on. Metallica, that was a fun one.
Yeah, AC/DC.
Run the Lightning instead of Ride the Lightning. Yeah. Skid Row we even did, which is kind of a left of center one.
That was one of my favorite ones I did.
Yeah, that was cool. I feel like that joke was, the joke kids got, but I think a lot of the parents were like, what is this fucking shirt? But what is it's what it, Slave to the Grind is not exactly like an iconic cover. I mean, it's known in the metal community and if you were a hair metal person, but like outside of that, I don't think it doesn't have those like resonances, so.
Like it's known by name more than by reputation, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So, but yeah, so this is part of the journey here, and I think Sacred Reich is a interesting kind of palate cleanse coming off of Holy Terror, which was very Speaking of Holy Terror, Kurt got a hold of us, and he really dug the episode. He wrote, he got a hold of me on Facebook, and at the same time got a hold of you through email. And he was really impressed. I mean, he was like, you know, you guys didn't get everything in terms of like some of the story of the band accurate. And I kind of wrote him on Facebook about that. I said, I just, you know, and he wasn't, I don't think he was angry about it. I think he was like, just like, hey, I've got more that I could tell you if you want to know.
Yeah, he just seemed like he wanted to offer extra.
Yeah. So
he was like stoked that, I mean, fuck, it came out I think he emailed us 2 days after the episode came out.
Yeah, like he forwarded me the email, and he had already commented on Facebook about it, so he got it like really quick.
I think he's probably got a Google alert.
Well, somebody tagged him on our post.
Okay, there you go.
I'm trying to think who it was. It might have been Rob Allen, is the guy who's in Evil Dead, who's in Evil Dead with Juan Garcia, who used to be in Agent Steel with Kurt.
Okay,
so there's like a network kind of shared there. Rob's a big fan of the podcast, and I talked to him a lot on Facebook. And so I think he tagged both Kurt and Mike Alvard, the guy that we were reading a lot of interviews from. So, and then Mike just today liked the podcast. So like, yeah, so it's kind of weird. So yeah. So between that and Tony Scaglione from Whiplash, like, I guess we're we're connecting to like some of the actual people, which is cool. You know, that's to me, like, if you could get approval from, you know, the people that you're writing these, you know, doing these episodes about, then like, if you've done them justice, that makes me more happy than almost anything else, you know?
Yeah. If they give a crap, like, that's what I've weighed my other, it's really affirming to hear from those guys instead of hearing from, you know, some listener that's just like, oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh shit, these guys, they lived through it. They've been like, this has been their thing for 35 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they give a shit enough to listen to a 3-hour episode about us yammering about it.
Yeah. Yammering about, you know, really trying to break it down. But even he, I think Kurt said both in the email and on the post, he said, like, you guys really nailed like the analysis of the songs. And that was a thing he was really, really pleased with. You know, we didn't have all the puzzle pieces because, granted, the only interviews I really found out there were interviews with Mike. So I didn't really ever get like much of Kurt's perspective, you know, and being part of and stuff. So, but really cool. And actually, we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback on this Thrash series. A lot of the new patrons that have signed up, we've got a couple to announce. Thomas Gilliam is back as a patron. And then we have a new guy that just signed up yesterday and wrote us, Sam Frankel. And he wrote, hey guys, really enjoyed the Thrash series recently. I've been listening on and off for years and definitely should have contributed before, but have been slow to get into the Patreon thing. And I wrote him back and said, hey, better late than never. And he said, hey, beer's on me if you guys are ever in Minneapolis, for real. So we'll take you up on that, Sam.
It's a good city. I know lots of people there.
Chris True lives there, and he always invites me up. He's like, come visit me in the summer times, you know, and I've thought about it, but then this summer I went and visit Chris in North Carolina as my little kind of weird pilgrimage. But yeah, I've thought about getting in a car and driving out there and just seeing, you know, St. Paul, Minneapolis, that kind of thing. So who knows, Sam, maybe your dreams will come true someday. So
it's going to be expensive, dude.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly.
Well, for him. Yeah.
For him to buy some beer for us.
We all have only the best.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a craft beer guy, you know. So what can I say? But
craft beer, craft bourbon.
Yes. I'm drinking right now some craft cherry vanilla rum and Coke.
I'm having a New Belgian Voodoo Ranger.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
IPA. That's a 9%.
Whoa.
Yep.
Nice.
And I also have some bourbon.
Nice. Well done.
I got a surprise 5th from a client in the mail, which was very nice.
Oh, that was really cool. Really cool. Yeah, I had brought home a lot of really interesting, cool beers from Georgia, where I was for Thanksgiving, where I got my COVID scare, which is why Mark and I are doing this as Zoom, probably for the last time. I think the next time we'll be able to get face to face here. But I brought home a bunch of really kind of weird beers and things like that. One was an Icelandic beer. It's pretty awesome. Yeah, exactly. Weird. Then
I don't know if I've ever. What's the profile of an Icelandic beer?
It kind of has. It reminded me of like a really good German wheat. Is kind of what it had, but there might have been like a little je ne sais quoi to it. There was just a little something different that must be the Icelandic ingredient, whatever that is.
Like fresh hot spring or something?
Yes, it must have probably a little bit of, some sulfur spring or something in there. But they had Yingling, which, I've had Yingling plenty of times. We can't really get it here in Michigan that I know. And down there, they had a Yingling Hershey's chocolate porter. Whew.
That's weird for, usually Yingling's pretty, they have like the black and tan and just the standard lager.
And so when I saw that, I was like, holy shit. First of all, I love porters. Second of all, I like chocolate porters. And I was like, well, give it a try, when in Rome.
Yeah.
And it held up. It was quite delicious. So we,
I picked up some, I was at an Asian grocery store and picked up some Chang lager, which is a Thailand beer that I had a ton on my honeymoon.
Oh yeah, I don't know I'm sure I had beer in Thailand. Although I think, to be honest, when we were in Krabi, I was drinking like as many tropical drinks as possible because I kind of have.
It's nothing to write home about. It's just like it was cheap and it was like, okay, it's a nice lager, but mostly it was served warm.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't terrible warm, so that was kind of like a thumbs up for that. But I just saw it at the place and I was like, oh shit, why not?
Nostalgia. Yeah, hell yeah, man. Absolutely. So
let's give it a try.
So yeah, we're coming out of Holy Terror. We're coming out of hopefully those of you that are patrons enjoyed, if you got a chance to listen to the Devastation show that we recorded last week. We did get some good comments on that. And actually, in terms of patron stuff, I don't know if you looked, but I'll share. Crap, I'm on the patron page. We had a poll that was up, and it's pretty much kind of, I think, a done deal at this point. But basically, I had a poll for what we want our next patron show to be for the Thrash series. We're going to do kind of one final part. It won't let me click on it. I was going to try and... Oh, here we go. View. Sorry. Usually I look at the patron page on my phone on the app. So when I look on my phone, it's usually a little bit easier. So anyways, the polls basically say Heathen, Victims of Deception, got 7. So that's what we're going with as our third patron show. Hallows Eve, Tales of Terror got 3. Liege Lord, Master Control got 3. Atrophy, Socialized, Hate, and Violent by Nature got 3. And then I think one other little straggler vote for Realm. And we didn't talk about Realm. I should have, Mark. Realm was the other Wisconsin thrash band.
Of the 3.
Yeah. So I mean, Realm was like up there with Morbid Saint, and then who's the other one? Is there another one from Wisconsin that we're forgetting about? But I know Realm kind of toured a lot with Morbid Saint, and I've got both those Realm CDs. They're the Endless War and Suiciety. I think they're both Metal Mind releases.
Okay.
You've probably seen the cover to Endless War. It has like a kind of a Trojan horse looking cool thing on the cover. It's cool. Suiciety is very like tech thrash. It's pretty advanced. It's cool.
It sounds like a name for something I would have called a piece of art when I was in high school.
What's that? Suiciety?
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's deep shit, man. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But yeah, anyway, so that's kind of what's up. So if you want to become a patron, go to patreon.com/Requiem Podcast, or you can go to requiempodcast@gmail.com, requiemmetal.com,
yes,
our website, and you can click on the Patreon link that's there and sign up through there. That's where you can also find our first 160 episodes, and you can get links to Mark's artwork and all kinds of fun stuff. So we never do this at the beginning of the show, so I figured maybe if people don't make it to the end, here you go. Now they know. Now they
need to get some shopping bags.
Yeah, exactly. Shopping bags for Christmas. We never did really seize on the making Requiem masks, but I don't know. I always felt like really weird. Like at first I thought about getting like masks that had like cool shit on them, and then I saw other people with masks that had shit on them, and I was like, oh, that's not cool. Okay.
No, I just use the blue ones that you buy at the store that are completely generic. I'm not gonna. I would gladly give bands money for merchandise, but I don't need to propagate the coronavirus any more than it already is. It's something we got to deal with. I'm not gonna turn it into some capitalist shit.
Sure, yeah. I got a mask that just had like basically you can trade the filters in and out, and I just kind of wash it in the sink and stuff like that, or keep it in my car.
Yeah, I don't. It's not like a T-shirt for me. I'm not like excited about wearing a mask like that. So like, it doesn't really do anything for me.
Yeah. At first, I thought about it from like a teaching standpoint. You know, like would it be would it be cool? You know, whatever. But would it be a conversation piece? And I was like, fuck it, I don't care enough to invest in shit like this.
Just wear a T-shirt.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, so that's where we're at. So here we are with Sacred Reich, and different type of record, I think, than what we've done the last couple episodes. At least it's not nearly as savage as your Morbid Saints or your Devastations, where they were kind of towing that line into sort of more extreme stuff. And they're definitely not as dense as Holy Terror. This is very much out of the camp of you heard it in Death Squad, which is like a killer opening. Yeah, I mean that's like what an awesome like opening cut to a record, And
I feel like these guys are kind of like they're like the power trip of their day.
Got it.
I think they took, like, some people say that them, Testament, Death Angel, Dark Angel were kind of like the second wave of thrash.
Second tier, yeah, second
and
wave.
I think that at least this first record, Sacred Reich, really they kind of like did thrash or at least not just thrash, but crash like crossover so good that there was no like it's more leaning this side for punk and this more side for metal. It was like completely integrated.
Yep.
Like just perfectly.
Well, and Ignorance is like, or in Death Squad, which opens up Ignorance. I mean, you have that opening Death Angel sort of like just cool ass thrash riff. I mean, it's so simple. It's almost dumb, but I kind of love that about good thrash sometimes, right? It's like good like Swedish death metal, just like it hits that HM2 kind of thing, and you're just like, you've heard it a million times, but it never doesn't make you feel good, And that's
this was like Exodus as far as like intensity.
Yeah.
But it was like it was way more, discharge as far as
more punkish,
lyrical presentation.
PRI and stuff like that. Yeah, absolutely. The crossover sort of aspect to it. In a way, like some of the main riffing in like Death Squad, which we just heard, will show up 2 years later, because this is 87. It'll show up 2 years later on Agent Orange, Sodom. Like it's like the template for that type of sort of sound, that Sodom started to transition out of the more brutal stuff and into the more like that catchy stuff that they'll do from Agent Orange kind of forward. They hint at it on Persecution Mania, which may have influenced some of the sound on this record, frankly, although I think they're contemporaries. I think that record came out a few months before this one did, so I'm sure they didn't hear each other, but I mean, you've got, basically the band at this point on Ignorance is you've got Greg Hall on drums. You got Jason Rainey, who's basically, I think he's kind of the MVP of the band in a lot of ways, because he's the rhythm guitarist. And I feel like he does to this band what like Scotty Ian does for like Anthrax.
Yeah. And we lost him this year too.
Yeah. Yeah. Sad.
In March of 2020.
Okay. Oh, really? Oh yeah. I didn't write that down.
Yeah. He was 53.
Oh. Good call on that. Yeah, I think, I did write it down. It's just not where I have the lineup. But yeah, I mean, he's kind of like the guy doing the simple stuff, but the simple stuff, it's like Hetfield for Metallica. The rhythm guitarist is such a crucial part to like good thrash, unless you're doing like what Slayer does, where you have two lead players. You know what I mean?
But I think the leads in this don't really matter. They like elevate everything, but they're not... they're not as important. This is like a super rhythmic band, just like Violence.
Yes. Yeah. But to give credit where credit's due, Willie Arnett is pretty solid.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He kind of has sometimes like a formula where he wants to do like the more violent sort of like Gary Holt, Hanneman, King stuff, but he's like a little more listenable. And I don't mean that in a way that's a detriment to Exodus and Slayer, because I think people who listen to this podcast know how we feel about those bands, especially early Exodus and Slayer. But but it's like he's a little bit more, he's violent, but not like off the rails violent, but he's got like that really attacking kind of solo type style playing. He's not doing Kirk Hammett stuff, And then Phil Ryan, who's a hell of a bassist, and there's a lot of really fantastic bass playing that we'll talk about throughout this record.
Well, and he's like he writes probably 85% of the record.
Yeah, and
or at least he's credited with it.
He's the only original member that's still in the band at this point.
Because Jason Rainey in the 2019 was it February of 2019? They let him go because he couldn't physically like actually do shows.
Gotcha.
And then he ended up, dying 2020 of a heart attack. So I think he might have had some type of chronic health issues or something.
Gotcha. Okay.
And if I was watching a bunch of stuff on YouTube of them, like they're at Vakken in 2019, and he looked pretty rough.
Did he? Got it. Yeah, I know nowadays you got Rind and Arnett are still there, and then they've brought in, was it Dave McLean from Machine Head is drumming for them now.
Yes, on drums, yeah.
And he was with them earlier during an era we're not really talking about. I think like the early 90s era. McLean hooked up with them, and then he left them for Machine Head when Machine Head started and stuff like that. But yeah, and we'll talk about their new record at the very end because they are one of the bands that's kind of made a kind of a comeback of sorts, and we'll sort of talk about that near the end. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. Ignorance comes out in 87, and DRI had just put out Crossover about 7 months prior. And I don't think that necessarily it was a huge influence on these guys, but to me, they're like...
it was in the air, I think.
They're copacetic, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like that, what that Crossover record represented, what Suicidal was doing and COC was doing. But like Crossover from DRI, I feel like was like the big one. That was the one that like had the most like thrash kind of stuff going on. And, I think politically what Phil Ryan's kind of talking about fits in more with some of that punk aesthetic or that hardcore aesthetic that those bands were sort of doing. And I think that's one of the things that makes these guys kind of interesting where, Holy Terror was really targeting a lot of things like, organized religion and things like that. And these guys will as well when we get to like No Believers, but they're very much more of that thrash aesthetic I talked about a couple episodes ago when I was going through, thrash politics a bit. This is that band, you go through like, I kind of made a note, you go through like the whole album and you've got, the song Ignorance is about nuclear war. The song we just heard, Death Squad, is about kind of like the Contras, basically like right-wing death squads that were being used to fight the Cold War. Victim of Demise is, medical biology gone amok. So that could be more like any thrash band. No Believers, very much Bible thumping, kind of anti-religious. Rest in Peace, that's more like a Slayer type song, Serial Killers. But then the eponymous Sacred Reich is basically an anti-Nazi, anti-fascism thing. Then you got Violent Solutions. It's about the cost of war and violence. Administrative Decisions, about the broken education system. So they were very much entrenched in that kind of thinking man's thrash, is what they were kind of going for. But
their sound was really entrenched in party thrash.
Yeah, that's the weird part is I think the bands that they inspired would be like your Municipal Wastes and some of those type of bands today. You know what I mean?
I feel like they kind of like encapsulate my favorite parts of thrash.
Okay.
It's like the best rhythmic palm muted stuff. And I think like the drumming is pretty fucking standout. I can't think of anybody else that was doing stuff quite as this good except for Gene.
Yeah. Or maybe
as far as speed was concerned.
Yeah.
I always put Lombardo in a different category because I think he's his own guy.
Yeah, I get
like
you.
His fills and I couldn't say enough great shit about him. But as far as like fast drumming was going,
yeah, it's like talking about Hendrix like as a guitar. You just don't. Hendrix is his own category, or something like that. When it comes,
I think guitar. Metal is it's set up, pre Lombardo and post Lombardo.
Yes. Yeah.
As far as my taste is concerned,
from like a drumming standpoint, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting.
He's just as important as anybody else in that band.
Do you know the story about Greg Hall and Slayer?
I feel like I should, but I think I read it, but I might have forgot it.
This is cool. I'm glad you brought it up because it's kind of the perfect time to sort of mention it. Drummer Greg Hall was asked to play with Slayer after Tony Scaglione left in January of '87, and they were kind of working out some of the details, and then suddenly Lombardo decided to come back. So it just never happened.
Okay.
So he was right on the precipice. And there's this great quote from Kerry King where he says, "He looks like Barney Rubble, but damn, the man can jam." So Slayer had a lot of respect for Greg Hall's drum performance on this, for sure.
It's pretty incredible. It's actually recorded really well.
And the person that engineered this is the fine Bill Meteor, who did, of course, Show No Mercy up through Hell Awaits for Slayer and a lot of the Metal Blade bands. These guys were Metal Blade. Yep. So I apologize. I was in mid-thought talking about Bill Meteor's production and things cut out. But I restarted my internet on my end in case it's me. We don't know if it's Zoom, but something kind of weird. So we don't usually have this issue. The one time I do remember we recorded an entire Blind Guardian Talkset years ago, and then you're like, oh, fuck, I forgot to hit record. And we had just done like a 20-minute like venture. And we're like, okay, we got to go back and recapture whatever we just did there.
That was like 10 years ago.
I know. That's really the only time I remember like kind of a crazy, bizarre technological sort of thing. But I guess like one thing as we start to introduce this, and then we're going to kind of go on a weird kind of detour. I want to at least introduce the band, then we're going to kind of come back towards Ignorance again. But I just wanted to talk at least about like Phil Ryan, the main guy, only original member. Obviously, if you're new to the band, the prevailing thing that I just kind of went through and talked about is that lyrically, they really capture, I think, the anxiety of the day, whether it be government malevolence, corrupt politics, corrupt military, Reagan Cold War critiques, nuclear war, all that stuff. The quote unquote, the American way, which is going to be their next full length record. And Phil Ryan has an interesting sort of background. He's a part, Jewish descent, and he had family members who survived at Dachau in the concentration camps. And I think that, some of that type of stuff definitely shaped him and kind of gave him very much more of a kind of a left-wing kind of perspective in terms of how he critiques the military and the wealthy and things like that. He's not as nearly as angry today as he is on Ignorance. I mean, he's full of a lot of vigor.
No, he's much more mellow.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that when we get there, that he's, he's just he's a Buddhist now and has been for a while, and he's kind of found ways to sort of like push this anger. And one question I want you kind of thinking about is, is that a detriment to the creativity of the band for him not to be able to sort of tap into that natural sort of anger? Something interesting to kind of think about, because does he need that anger to be able to make an authentic, art piece? Or it's one of those kind of things, like if you're too mellow and too like balanced in your life, do you have the vigor and the vitriol to sort of still be making good metal? I don't know. It's a question I want to explore when we get to the end of the episode, I guess, is what I'm kind of introducing it to you. But right from the very get-go, they've got kind of interesting artwork. This sort of gas mask punk mascot that has kind of I've noticed like a lot of almost like a hardcore punk kind of aesthetic to like what they're doing with the album cover and stuff. Absolutely. Like that. I don't know if it struck you as a particular style or whatever. I know
when I first heard about these guys, it probably was like the American Way when that record came out.
Yeah.
They were like too like humorous for my taste at the time.
A little too tongue-in-cheek with a couple of things they're doing there.
Yeah, they were like too political, because it was, I don't know, that stuff didn't do a whole lot for me either. Like Napalm was political, but it wasn't as like blatant against like George Bush, and it wasn't like as blatant about who they were pissed off about. Yeah, it was just about the inequities and the corruption of politics and stuff. This seemed kind of more like on the nose.
Yeah,
and I didn't really give a shit about it when it came out. But this first record, I think, is pretty special.
Yeah, I mean, Ignorance is pretty amazing, and there's even like there's some choice parts of like Surf Nicaragua that are okay. The follow-up EP. I don't really like the Surf Nicaragua song itself, but I actually like some of the covers that they do. They're okay.
They feel like they're kind of like going up from like Jello, and Dead Kennedys a little bit.
Yep. I think not to get too much into the American way, the follow up to Ignorance, but I listened to some of it yesterday and today just to get kind of a feel for it. And I'd heard it before. It just, there's so much intensity and energy on Ignorance. I just feel like they, 3 years later when they put out American Way, they've lost some of that. 3 years is a long time. And
vocally too, it's kind of just like, ugh.
Yeah, Phil's not as savage as he is.
Yep.
And in a moment, in a little bit, we're going to play something from the demo in '86, and he's even more like just grab you by the throat, even on the demo stuff.
It's pro death metal.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah, it's pretty wild stuff. But I guess to kind of get the band sort of started and to kind of create the sort of connection. He, in an interview I found with Phil and Revolver, he says that they were, he says, our big brother band was Flotsam and Jetsam. So Jason Newsted was in the band at the time, and he was the captain of that ship. He was the bass player and I was a bass player. So I'd wake up in the morning and go to school and find like a stack of flyers in my driver's seat in my car. He had come by in the middle of the night and dropped off a bunch of flyers. I would lend them my cabinets. Jason wrote our first bio. Jason gave us his mailing list, which at the time was a huge deal. He made the mailing list of all these fans all over the world and all over Europe and just gave it to us so we could send out our demos. He would put interviews. He would do interviews, and he would just dictate the answers into a cassette and put our demo on the other side and send it out to people. So he was a humongous supporter of our band, huge. He was telling Metal Blade all the time, Sacred Reich. So he was a big champion, and we played a whole bunch of shows with them. So they were a band that we really looked up to. And I think that kind of gets into the idea of this like weird little local scene that's kind of going on in Arizona, which is where these guys hailed from, whether it be, Phoenix, Tucson, it's its own little like mini thrash scene that wasn't part of the coasts. It's kind of just its own unique thing. And I think you can even find some correlations of sort of, Flotsam and Jetsam wasn't like political or is inspired by punk, but like they don't necessarily fit in with the LA bands and they didn't fit in with the New York bands. And as much as there's parts of like Ignorance that have like Exodus kind of riffs or Death Angel riffs, and some of the California hardcore stuff, they also have like, there's a little bit of New York attitude in there, especially at the bass playing.
There's a lot.
It reminds me like Anthrax, Overkill.
There's some D.D. Verney bass gun for sure.
That D.D. Verney all over the place. So it's like, I feel like those bands that we've talked about in this thrash series, especially, your Midwestern bands, they can kind of grab bag from a lot of this and do their own kind of spin, and they don't have to get trapped into kind of the expectations of what the California thrash sound or San Francisco or the New York or.
Well, think of like how many bands that Newsted actually like championed, and really like Voivod was the big one.
Yeah, I know.
And this is like kind of like the second one that I've really heard anything about.
Yeah, so it's cool.
So that kind of shows you what they're dealing with.
And he's a good guy. I mean, that's the thing. That's
he's a loyal guy.
That's the thing I've always gotten, and I always felt bad. As much as I love Cliff, like I felt bad of how he was sort of treated by Metallica through the years. It's kind of unfortunate, but
he's doing good financially, though.
Yeah, I'm sure he's fine now. Exactly. And so just before we kind of really dive full scale into these guys, we obviously have already done a patron show on Flotsam and Jetsam. So if you want to hear that, sign up, become a patron. That was our first bonus patron show. And on those first couple records from Flotsam, and we both enjoyed them. That was a band. I think both of us had a lot of preconceived notions of Flotsam, and I think you could say the same thing about Sacred Reich. I know that Chris is not big on these guys, and I remember having a conversation with this summer, and he was talking about the 31 Flavors cover from American Way, and it's a dumb song. It just is, but you know what? Anthrax wrote a lot of really dumb songs here and there, and so did Exodus here and there. And so a lot of those bands that kind of like did the party thrash thing, like, or at least had that party thrash sound, that I think that lure of catchy, humorous stuff, like kind of sometimes got the best of them, at their own detriment.
Well, yeah, that's the stuff that just didn't stick with me because I was so dead serious about this death metal shit, which wasn't serious, but it was from another country, so
it seemed serious.
It seemed more serious.
Yeah.
So like going back and looking at this, like I'm sure American Way is probably fine. It doesn't do as much for me musically, but this album is just like, this is perfect thrash.
Yeah, this seems more like vital, more young, hungry. It's got all those elements that you want in those early kind of thrash
releases. It's a perfect distillation of like the first wave, really.
Yep. It kind of comes at the end of that first wave in a way.
At least everything I liked about the first wave.
Yeah. No, yeah, you're right. I mean, it maybe doesn't have the sort of haunting quality that like your Slayers maybe had, where they were tone blind, but that's not what they're about, But again, there's a morbidity to some of the realism of their lyrics too, right? That they're talking about real shit, not just fantasy stuff,
But I think Slayer is an outlier in thrash.
Yeah.
They're like most. I don't know. You could have a lot of people that are into Metallica, but when you talk about Slayer, even if they're like, in their 40s, they're like, ooh, I don't know, Slayer, that's kind of tough to listen to.
Yeah. They're either all in on, no one's like really neutral on Slayer most of the time.
It's like fucking Slayer or
they're not my cup of tea. I have never been able to wrap my head around them,
Yeah.
But yeah, so part of that trilogy with Flotsam and Jetsam was a band called Atrophy. And I thought, I talked about Atrophy being one of the bands that was on the poll. They got a few votes. And we probably won't ever have the pretext to do an Atrophy show. There's not a lot I know about them. They really are. They didn't really leave like a super crazy stamp on the history of thrash or anything like that. But I thought it'd be neat to at least just kind of highlight them, because I bet there are probably some Requiem people that don't know who Atrophy is. I mean, you don't really know much about them, and I just discovered them in the last year or so. They're kind of just hidden gem kind of thrash thing. Road Racer put them out. They had 2 records, Socialized Hate in 1988 and Violent by Nature in 1990. And then the main songwriter, I think, of the band, what the hell was his name? I have it written down. I thought I had it written down. I think the main guy left and went to med school, I believe. And so they just that was it for them. I didn't do a lot of research on Atrophy because they're not really the point of this, but they were kind of part of this Arizona trio, along with Flotsam and Sacred Reich. They were from Tucson, and they released 2 pretty solid, if not mind-blowing, albums, and their drummer Tim Kelly, kind of like the drummer for Sacred Reich, was kind of their secret weapon. And they had a really great guitar duo, as you'll hear here in a second, Chris Likens and Rick Skowron. And his insane solo that you'll hear coming right out of this first track, Chemical Dependency, is it's good stuff. I mean, it goes for the jugular and really kind of, beats you up. And one of the things that's cool about this song, Chemical Dependency from Socialized Hate, is it's like, it's drug addiction from like a first person standpoint, which I think was kind of interesting. It's kind of like this person like walking you through like their own, kind of not. I don't know if Master of Puppets necessarily did that. Master of Puppets was more of just like a pronouncement of drug addiction. You know what I mean? It wasn't really like
amongst other things.
Yeah. It's also produced by Bill Meteor. Even though he's not Metal Blade. And the band just kind of has this like kind of, it's drawn from a lot of the thrash pool, your Exodus, a little bit of Nuclear Assault, a little bit of Toxic, which is a band we didn't really talk about. Very riff-tastic. And when you get to like Violent by Nature, we're going to play the title track from that too. You'll start to hear kind of more I wrote tasty, mid-pace kind of Creator, early Megadeth kind of touches with some cool Exodus grooves throughout. So here we go. So I guess for people that don't know much about Atrophy, here's a little taste, and then we'll come back and like I said, spend the rest of our time on the Sacred Reich. So we got Chemical Dependency and Violent by Nature.
too bright. Life the pain and I'm to blame, and you put your shame.
All right, that was Violent by Nature and Chemical Dependency from Atrophy, not Sacred Reich.
And not Naughty by Nature.
Not Naughty by Nature, although I can get down with some OPP and some hip hop.
Yeah, absolutely.
I got it's fun party rap from the early 90s, brings you back. So the whole band kind of, I talked about the role that Newstead played with them. And essentially what started to happen is that they got together. I believe they formed in like 84, 85, and they finally got a demo together in 86. And it's called the Draining You of Life demo. And it's widely considered, Mark, I don't know if you knew this, one of the great thrash metal demos ever made. because it was so fully formed compared to a lot of demos that, were floating around at the time that really couldn't really be released as like actual releases. And even though it wasn't really released until like bonus tracks on later records, like it still has some pretty good potency for a demo, and I've heard a lot of demos that just don't have like a good sound to them, but you can kind of tell why this like really got them a lot of instantaneous attention. And I think the second they put this demo out is when Slagle reached out to them and got them to record Ignorance again from the demo for Metal Massacre 8. Yeah. And that sort of obviously led them to releasing a full length a year later and stuff. And so...
and even like earlier we were talking, Jason Rainey, the guitar player, apparently before the band started, he'd only been playing guitar for 6 months.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And,
so I wonder if that has a little bit of that immediacy and
I think so. Well, and Willie Arnett's not in the band on the demo. It's a guy named Jeff Martinick, I believe, the other guitar player. And man, Phil's vocals here are raw as fuck. They're really
Teutonic even.
Yes, I could definitely hear some of that. I hear like the atonal solos that you hear in this "Draining You of Life" tune that we're about to play. Like I said, it harkens back to like a lot of like early Creator. Like it really has that kind of thing. It's definitely less melodic than what you'll hear in Ignorance and stuff like that. But it's kind of got a sped up kind of Testament, the Legacy kind of feel to some of the riffs here as well. At least in the title track. And the title track, I believe, is the only thing off the demo that wasn't re-recorded for Ignorance. I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds right.
And we're going to play Draining You of Life because it's the only place that you can kind of hear it. Although they do re-record Draining You of Life for Surf Nicaragua. So I guess they basically re-record everything eventually from the demo, but it's not just all on their debut. And then the other song we're going to play, which you can find the other version on Ignorance, but I kind of like to highlight how powerful this demo is because I think it's just really interesting, is No Believers. And No Believers, where you hear a lot of the Dee Verney stuff, right? The bass.
Yeah, that bass. I mean, the whole percussive section is just like real strong.
Yeah. Yeah, the way that Phil is kind of oscillating back and forth with Greg Hall here is killer on No Believers. There's even this little fill that he does that flies just past the end of the riffs. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. And
it's really, really cool for people to sort of listen to.
No pun intended.
Yes. Oh man, wow, you got me there. That was well done. Well done. You've had a few more beers and whiskeys than I have, so good for you.
I get I'm
your sharp
right
wit
now.
is at you're at peak wittiness. But you get this great bass intro at the beginning of No Believers, and then you get kind of a one of the trippiest riffs that Sacred Reich plays that emerges around the 30-second mark, and then it just goes fucking full speed ahead, and that's when you start hearing like the drums doing the little like cool fills and stuff like that. And I really like how the solo just kind of bubbles to the surface at the very end of No Believers, and it just kind of crashes the song to sort of an end, and it's like
it's one of the most like ominous things they've done.
Yeah, and it's very much like I wrote. It would make like Gary Holt, Kerry King, Hanneman proud because it has that caustic kind of soloing energy that you don't hear as much on Ignorance. They kind of clean it up a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of Anthrax in this as well as far as the bass and drum kind of like interaction.
Yep, I could definitely hear that as well. And so maybe the Martiniak guy that's playing, I think, a lot of the leads on it, I think he brought something a little different to this that, I think ultimately Arnett is a better guitar player and a better lead player, but it's almost like Martiniak is like more savage. You know what I mean? It's like perfect for this early era. So, but let's get into it. Let's hear the demos, and then we can come back and really start to dive into Ignorance a little bit more. So we've got Draining You of Life and No Believers from the Draining You of Life demo from 1986.
It was come to
That was No Believers and Draining You of Life from the very famous Draining You of Life demo. So now we get to go full scale into Ignorance. And I guess my thought would be is, and you've already hinted towards it, you talked about kind of your old perceptions of this band. When you were kind of going into this, did you think you would kind of dig this, or did you still kind of have some of those like leftover preconceived thoughts of what you thought Sacred Reich kind of sounded like? Or
I was pretty sure this was going to be something I was going to be very happy with.
Okay.
Like very immediate, like Violence. Okay. At least the first record, because I went and listened to this record probably, I don't know, a dozen times or something.
Yeah.
And then listened to some of the later on stuff, like stuff that was more popular. And I was like, okay, that's why I didn't like it.
Yep.
But they were pretty, it was like Power Trip, Exodus, like really that kind of like real like on the edge thrash that I really loved, real Paul Mute heavy, real lots of hardcore thrown into it, very crossover. So yeah, like just like looking at the cover for Ignorance, I was like, okay, this is probably gonna be right up my alley.
This is gonna tickle you. Yeah. That's cool. I was happy because I think at first maybe when Chris was kind of naysaying Sacred Reich and I kind of threw them on the list, I maybe got the feeling that this might be the one where you were like, I'm not sure. You know what I mean? Like, not that you were against it, but you were just kind of like uncertain of like whether or not it belonged with the bands we've sort of covered up to this point. But I started to get this hint before we recorded this, like a couple weeks ago, when we ended Holy Terror, where you're like, I think I'm going to like Sacred Reich. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, that's good. Like, I just didn't know where you were at with it. I didn't know if you were very negative like Chris was, because Chris really kind of, I think, had a bad experience with Sacred Reich, and
I think so.
Seemed to sort of, I didn't know if like you shared that same experience with them or not, you know.
Not as much, but I mean, that was like, it was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So
shit.
I don't like to rely on my teenage ideas about a lot of stuff.
Exactly.
Because I think I was kind of dumb then. I want to be, proved wrong.
Sure. Yep.
Or at least like want to go in fresh. Because there's a lot of people that really love this band, and like they can't all be wrong. So I want to go into a little bit like more of an open mind. And I was like, okay, this is great. The Ignorance record, I think, is flawless. I think after that, it doesn't really hit as hard for me.
Yeah, no, I don't really see. I mean, if I found like used copies of American Way, I'd probably pick them up. They're affordable, but it's not. Sure. I'm not seeking out to like pick this up. Anything post Ignorance.
I think Ignorance is like one of like in the top 6 of thrash albums for me.
Wow. That's
I would throw them with like Violence and Metallica. I wouldn't even throw I think I like them more than Testament.
Wow. Just this record better than anything Testament.
Well, I think like Testament did a lot of stuff, a lot of different things. I think the Sacred Reich and Ignorance is like a perfect thrash record.
Okay.
I think Testament was always more in like traditional heavy metal.
Especially the way maybe like Skolnick approached like leads and things like that, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were always more musical. These guys are more kind of like, barbaric.
Okay.
At least on the first record.
Yeah, it's very, I mean, it's...
And I've got very specific ideas what I think thrash is. I think like Violence, these guys, Metallica, Megadeth, Exodus, like kind of like encapsulate that really good for me. The really aggressive, really palm muted heavy, very rhythmic stuff.
You could probably throw like Act of God probably in that as well a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
That's kind of doing that sort of sound. Yeah. Yeah, I guess it depends on kind of people's like where their thrash palette is, because I think, like you mentioned in the last set, like Slayer's just doing its own unique thing,
Slayer, I think is I mentioned last episode, is the most influential band on extreme metal ever.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. You can't, nobody's even close.
No. Yeah. It's without a doubt.
Like Metallica, they're a big deal, but Slayer is where it's at.
In terms of the music we've gone on to listen to.
As far as extreme metal goes, yes.
Yep. The things that,
there's no doubt.
Yep. But it's weird, but their brand of thrash is its own brand. It's not like, I can see distinct patterns that are very similar between Megadeth and Metallica and Testament and Death Angel and stuff, where Slayer just kind of
I think they're more new album, all those bands.
Yeah.
I think Slayer might be the first pure thrash band. Except, the first couple records, there's some new album going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of new album and like Fate.
But from like Rain and Blood on,
yeah,
it's kind of their own thing.
Yeah, that's true.
And like Ruben's stuff is very rhythmically based, so I think like that was like perfect for him to mess with, to work with them. Sure.
Yeah, coming out of like the hip hop background, he kind of thought things through like almost rhythmically more.
Even with like what he did with Danzig, like what made that so good is like Chuck Biscuits.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
At least for what made it resonate with me, but
no, like him and Eerie really opened up like kind of really warm rhythmic pockets that I think made that Danzig stuff breathe and feel more catchy and rock and roll based and yeah, that's an interesting thought. I'm trying to see where I sit on the fence. I have such a wide spectrum for things, even though I do tend to, I think about genreification and compartmentalization and stuff, but I guess I hadn't thought about like the thrash purity kind of question. And I guess it catches me off guard when you say like top 6. I'm like, man, that's awesome. Like I'm happy that like you dug this so much, but I guess I didn't expect that. You know what I mean?
Well, so, it checks off everything that I think is important for thrash metal.
Yeah. No, everything you're saying is it holds true for sure. I'm happily surprised in a cool way. So, and that's the kind of stuff like when we're about to kind of really dive into the meat of this record here. Side A. I mean, Side A is just something special. I mean, I love Side B. But Side A is just like, Jesus, just one thing kind of after another. And a lot of really cool textures going on. I mean, you come out with Death Squad, which we opened the whole show up, and you got this awesome 2 minutes of just fucking awesome riffing before the song really kicks in. And then
that's like the Slayer vibe.
Yeah.
Like the build. That's like
the Hell Awaits.
The first band that really did that for me was Slayer.
Yeah. Which is weird because they're not known for long songs necessarily. I mean, I guess Hell Awaits, but
well, they're known for atmosphere.
Yeah,
like even with as fast as like Rain and Blood is, like the build that they do is just incredible.
I mean, I was just playing for my roommate who is not really a metal guy last night. It's a weird place that we got to, but he plays in a band. And they have a lot of kind of funk-ish influences, but not like, I don't know, like funk, but like they also do like War Pigs. So like they're coming at it. And he was like, well, we kind of want to maybe write some original songs. So I was like, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want this band to sound like? And so I was trying to like help him form a palette. And somehow we ended up, because they do have some like innate funk things, but they don't want to be like 311 obviously.
Nobody does.
So I was kind of showing him like I was showing him Faith No More and kind of how they did stuff, and like Fishbone and a couple other bands that kind of had
Mindfunk?
elements. I did not go to Mindfunk quite,
Okay.
but somehow we got in like a weird conversation about Mike Patton. And then I was like, yeah, so here's this other band Mike Patton was in. I played him some Mr. Bungle, and he was just like, what the fuck? You know, it was just whatever. And then like I was like, okay. And then this guy Mike Patton did like this band with the guy from the Melvins, and I played him some Melvin stuff. And then I was like, and the drummer from Slayer, and we were listening to Rain and Blood for that purpose. That's how we got there. And I was talking about just like the drums, and like that opening to Rain and Blood still, like with the lightning and the thunder and on the storm, like it's so cheesy in theory, but it's not cheesy at all. Like it's still 30 years later, like haunts, and it's so fucking atmospheric and awesome. So
well, it hits all the like emotional highs that a like a classical record would.
Yeah. It's
and I think Lombardo is the best metal drummer to ever exist, in my opinion.
I mean, I think there's people that probably can do a few more things than him, but they don't do it all the way he does it with such panache and like tunefulness. I think that's the thing he brings to the table.
He made the vocabulary.
Yeah.
Because nobody, I mean, Lars is great for what he did. He's like, but he's not, I wouldn't say he's a great drummer, but he's a great orchestrator of things. But Lombardo is just a fucking incredible drummer.
Yeah, he
elevates everything he's in.
Yep. And he becomes the center of almost everything he's in a cool way. You know, like because we got to Fantomas, and then but you could play like Grip. I mean, that's the thing. Like Grip is just like a drum record with like Gus Chambers like singing on top or whatever. You know, like and that's for sure. He brings something different to the table. But I think you're right. That's kind of one of the things, especially in like Victim of Demise here. This first song we're gonna play from Ignorance, like this sort of groove. I wrote killer rhythmic groove interplay between the bass and Hall's drumming. And it's like, that's something that they really locked onto, is that oscillating sort of thing. And maybe that's, I hear that not just in Slayer, but more in like Overkill and Anthrax. That's kind of the vibe I get from that when you're so in tune together with the rhythm section and bass player. Yeah.
I put nice NYC style bass drum prominence.
There you go. So yeah, we're hearing some of the same things, which is cool. This is where you can really detect a lot of, if you didn't catch it on Death Squad, a lot of the crossover kind of vibes here, some Suicidal, COC,
real heavy.
SOD riffs too. You know, I guess do you qualify SOD as crossover? I mean, they kind of sold themselves as that. You know,
I mean, I would. They're probably in the top 3.
Yeah, I just don't know if, like, to me they're like, because they're all thrash guys, it's like, is it cheating? Like, because is it just really thrash, you know, with crossover elements? Or
it's a weird thing, because I didn't really know about them when they were prevalent.
Okay,
like I knew of them, but they weren't like I didn't care.
Yeah,
I was like, you know, thrash death metal guy. Crossover, I didn't really even know. Like, what the fuck is this crossover of?
we were so obsessed with COC that we loved Blind and Deliverance that Grand Cocoon went back and like tracked down like Eye for Eye and some of that stuff in Animosity. Yeah. And so we tried to figure out what those were, and we knew that they didn't sound like other COC stuff, but like we sort of grew to like them, you know, and now I really like them, but I'm saying in high school, we were trying to figure it out in high school a little bit, but
because we were like, what are we 3 years apart?
4 grades, 3 years. So you were 4 grades ahead of me, but 3 years apart.
Because like the punk was always we were still like pretty like nobody liked each other between punk and metal when I was in school and when we were listening to the shit. But I always had the great respect for, you know, Dead Kennedys and Minor Threat and all that kind of shit.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that stuff, but for some reason crossover didn't really hit my radar until way later.
No, I didn't know anyone was listening to crossover. You know what I mean? Like, we just stumbled on it because we did our own research. That's the only reason we found it, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I picked up, I got Live at the Budokan from SOD, the live record on CD, like in probably freshman year, maybe in high school.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that was all live stuff from Speak English or Die, but I didn't actually get Speak English or Die until years later, because it wasn't like something you just like ran into very often, you know, but I just stumble on this live, and I love the live record. I mean, I would listen to like the riffs and I was like, holy shit, you know, and I knew Chromatic Death from Headbangers Ball. So like I almost knew some SOD riffs, kind of just like it was already programmed in my brain from years of watching Headbangers. I just didn't put like all the pieces together.
Wasn't that mostly like Charlie writing too?
Probably Danny too, you know.
Yeah.
Sure Dan was bringing some kind of interesting stuff, but yeah, I can imagine
I feel like the stuff that Anthrax did that really like resonates with me is always shit that Charlie writes.
Yeah.
Because he's the drummer.
Sure, yeah, and you lock on to, I think, drumming more than most people I know. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I've played drums for 20 years, not in bands, but like for fun.
Yeah,
and that's just what's always like. That's what drew me into jazz. That's what's like drew me into, you know, fucking funk and hip hop, and
sure,
it's always been the rhythmic kind of section.
Yeah, I think that's cool because that you bring that in a way that I can't. You know, like I'm bringing more like the intellectual, technical, you know, some of that kind of stuff. Because
But you're playing bass, man.
Yeah.
Back in the day,
I played some bass. I don't know.
Slapping the bass.
I could slap the bass with the best of them. Yeah, some Alice in Chains and some Rage Against the Machine songs, and you know, a few things like that is all I learned. And then I wish I had stuck with it now. Like I'm kind of like I'm at that maybe it's the midlife crisis point of your life where you're like, man, I wouldn't mind. Not that I have any free time, but like in a perfect world, like it'd be cool to like have some innate ability. What's that?
You could always make some free time. Some of those fucking Alice in Chains bass lines are great, man.
Oh yeah,
Jesus.
Yeah, no, I could play Angry Chair, and we, you know, Grindcore Coon learned it on guitar, and so we would jam that out and stuff. So
I think, you know, in the next several months, we should maybe not reevaluate, but do another version of an Alice in Chains show. Because I've done some deep diving lately and have lots of like very deep appreciation now.
They're incredible. I mean,
I'd put them in like the number one spot of that era of bands.
Yeah, I could see that.
Easy.
You know, they're definitely a darker kind of thing. You know.
Yeah. They really, if you go back and examine them, they don't fit. They're much more of like a hard rock, you know.
Sabbath.
If you put them next to Soundgarden and Nirvana, they still seem a little different. They're like their own thing.
I would make a pretty passionate argument that none of those four bands fit. And that's why that scene is so bizarre, because Pearl Jam is different. They're kind of coming out of like a late 60s kind of like Doors, Grateful Dead kind of mentality. Nirvana is clearly like, you know, trying to like do a punk ethos, but they're like, it's through like a totally like through a rock window, you know, it's like a weird thing. Soundgarden, they never really want it to be conventional necessarily. Like you look at some of like the weird things they put on their records, like there was never a normal Soundgarden record. Even their biggest shit had like bizarre shit on it all the time, you know?
Well, and Alice in Chains was originally Alice in Chains.
Exactly. Yeah. But then they were getting some Guns N' Roses kind of flack for that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, they were like more of that era. They're like a couple years older than a lot of those other guys.
Yeah.
And coming from a completely different era, so it was interesting. And the kind of like the clout they got from just being put on tours. Yeah. With like thrash bands and stuff too.
Titans and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I think people like thought they were the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all those bands, like, I mean, people forget like that Pearl Jam was like the biggest band right out the gate before Nirvana broke. You know what I mean? In like a weird way, like they kind of, you know, Nirvana like lapped them, and then eventually Soundgarden got bigger with Super Unknown, and Alice in Chains was always like big. They, you know, Dirt was kind of like maybe peak or Jar of Flies, but like it's weird. There was like all those bands were kind of like pole positioning. It just depended on what month you were sort of checking in terms of like who was the gigantic band out of those, you know.
The weird thing is that the only one that still like means a lot is Alice in Chains to me.
Oh, okay. I mean that
like the Nirvana really doesn't do much for me. What do you call it? Pearl Jam, does nothing for me at all.
Yeah, you never struck me as a guy that's like, unless you were there with it, I just don't think it like holds. And you're not like a Grateful Dead guy or a jam band kind of guy.
Not at all. No.
And I think that's those first three Pearl Jams are like they're good rock music, whatever.
There's a lot of dudes I really respect their opinion that love Pearl Jam.
Yeah, and I kind of just jump off the Pearl Jam train then, and I think it's like you had to get into it then. It's hard, I don't sit down and try and get anybody into Pearl Jam these days, and I haven't for 20 years. Right? It was like if you
right for the best.
Yeah, whereas I would with Soundgarden, I would with Alice in Chains, and I would to some extent with Nirvana, because I think Nirvana is kind of misunderstood because they almost like were too big for people to actually wrap their heads around like what was good about them sometimes. You know what I mean? Like people just hate them as an idea, and it's like, okay, well that's fine, but like here's a song where they're like doing Slayer riffs and people were like, oh, like it kind of catches people off guard. Like I don't know. I mean, those three bands I could do a show on any of those bands, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, or Nirvana, because I've taught so much and I've had to like break them down and think about them, and they meant so much to me. Like those are the bands that meant what like bands you and Chris were getting into in 1989 and 1990 meant to you guys. Because
that's what got me so, not to make this into a fucking Alice in Chains show, but just for, we can bullshit a little bit.
Yeah. It's Requiem Metal Podcast.
I never disliked Alice in Chains, but I don't. This is like this last year. Fuck, I can't believe how Dirt is like a perfect record.
Perfect.
Absolutely perfect record.
Drug record ever written.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Yeah, I mean, it's,
And there's been like, like Opeth has done, covers of Alice in Chains. Like there's a lot of bands that really, I think, appreciate that, but I don't. I heard the hits at the time, but man, it just fucking, maybe it's not just because I went through a divorce this year. But it's so fucking good, man. I remember
when we did the show. I mean, that's one of the reasons I pitched some of those bands, because I know that they're bands that maybe weren't on your radar screen at the time, but they're bands I still believe in. When I pitched Alice in Chains to you, 8 years ago, whenever we did that. Yeah. And my hope is like, maybe this deep dive will, kind of get you over that hurdle of whatever was holding up whatever your preconceived notions were or whatever, because we all have them.
Sure.
And so it's cool. It's cool to hear that, like, not that you weren't into it back then, but like you've just kind of grown in your appreciation of it. And
I just appreciate that it's so relevant still.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And some of the other stuff, when I hear it, doesn't hit me, but
yeah, Dirt
is just, God, it's up there with like, some of the top 10 records ever, I think.
It's incredible. Yeah. I mean, I got that on cassette tape in 7th grade, and it was like a game changer for me. I would listen to it before basketball games in middle school and stuff while I was reading Sandman comics. Like, it was just like, I was just in this like dark world, and like I looked around, I felt like other people weren't there with me. And it's not like an emo thing or whatever. I wasn't like depressed, but I just felt like I was, amongst my friends or amongst people I knew, I was like on the precipice of stuff that like other people weren't on the journey with yet. You know what I mean? And like they were like a gateway drug into like darker shit in a weird way. Like from there, I think we went right to like maybe Pantera and Sepultura, and then and then the gloves were off, and then we're through the door at that point.
The worst thing is that Sepultura and Alice in Chains still seem to kind of hold their vibrancy to me. Pantera does not. Well,
Pantera didn't do themselves a lot of favors, I think, with some of what they built off of, or some of, I think the cult of Pantera, I think, did a lot of damage for people like us. I think that almost the fan base in a way, and
I think the emotions they were trying to discuss.
Well, yeah, we talked about it in Devastation.
We're too like anger.
Yeah, it was almost like too juvenile. It was just like I was in that place at a point in my life, and then I wasn't in that place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, Far Beyond Driven came out in 9th grade, and that's a great record in 9th grade.
Perfect record, ninth grade.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And so I still love Far Beyond Driven and Vulgar and Cowboys and Everything Beyond. But I remember getting Great Southern Trendkill. And there's some really interesting songs in that record. I'll be honest, like Floods is a really fucking great song, but like I just wasn't there anymore. I was just I was like listening to Anathema and Catatonia, and I would put on Pantera, Great Southern Trendkill, and I would be like, objectively, what, Dime is doing some really cool riffs, and Phil's still fucking angry. Like, I give it to them. Like, they're popular and they're not watering their sound down, but I just realized I maybe just wasn't for me anymore, and that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give it to them that it was amazing what they were doing for a mainstream record. Yeah. They did not compromise at all, and that's I give it to them for that. But it doesn't. It's weird that some of these like emotions that these records kind of throw out don't stay. Like Hendrix, you still listen to, and it's like this still feels true.
Sure,
that feels like a very like specific time in your life that you don't want to. At least I don't want to relive.
Yeah. Well, I agree. Yeah, it kind of brings me back to like the darker side of like my adolescent thinking or something like that. And and I've met people that I feel like maybe got trapped there, and they seem to be guys that like Pantera and Five Finger Death Punch, and like they're just that's enough for them. It's just,
and that's fine.
Mindless kind of headbanging or whatever they're getting from it, but it was not enough to satisfy my curiosity and stuff. And I think different eras of music like translate into the future better. You think about like some of like disco, for instance, and I think there's some like interesting like underground disco stuff that was kind of like doing interesting things, but like mainstream disco doesn't translate very well beyond.
I mean, I still appreciate all the Bee Gees shit from that.
Sure.
I think it's fucking brilliant.
It's really great kind of pop music, but disco like didn't, I don't know, like it was a sound of that point. I think psychedelic is the same. I think there's a thing about music from like 66 through like 71 where some of those bands were like locked into like certain trends of that time, and some of that stuff doesn't age that well. Like even some Beatles kind of psychedelic stuff, like it's a little on the fruity side. There's a fruitiness to some of the psychedelic stuff, but like in its time it made sense. Like it was like absolutely like relevant, and I think Pantera in that, maybe Korn falls into that, and some of that early new metal where it was tapping into this very angry thing.
It was a raw emotion. That's what most people that I know that like you're of the generation where the first Korn record was kind of like it was kind of a big deal.
It was great. I mean,
it was a big I mean, as far as raw emotion went, that was as raw as you could get.
Yeah, he's fucking crying on the record.
It seems kind of, it's weird that like a 46-year-old guy is still singing about that.
Yeah,
but I can like listen to like Anathema Judgment and still like weep as a 46-year-old man. But if I hear that, I'm just like,
yeah. But there's like a maturity to like Anathema songwriting that I think isn't there with Korn. It's kind of like what you and I were in a text conversation a couple weeks ago because I came across that article on like Kevin Smith and how his movies haven't really grown up or translated unless you were like there at the time. Like I can appreciate those movies if I go back to like my teenage, early college, 1990s self, but those movies kind of exist in that vacuum of that era, and they don't age very well, and that sometimes happens, right?
Because the artists don't age, so like Anathema's has a pretty mature career, really, when you look at it.
Absolutely, yeah.
But if you look at something like Five Finger Death Punch is like more of a kind of a visceral surface band. That's what they've always kind of been. I don't think they have any illusions of anything differently. Yeah. And it's just about like the bass version, but I guess it makes sense because there's people like to get deep into stuff. People like to people like The Who, people like whatever, Crosby, Stills and Nash. Like there's different layers of music you can get into.
Sure. it's like hip hop, right? You can get into like exclusively like Public Enemy and Run the Jewels and very like politically minded,
or MC
stuff.
Hammer.
Or you could, look, some kind of just booty shake, kind of mindless, drug songs or whatever. And I mean, it's all the same, but
like the industrial scene had that same kind of thing. Like you could be like Nine Inch Nails at the time was just like a big like party band, really. And if you wanted to read deeper into it, you could. But like all that stuff had a little bit of like layers of density.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there you go. That's a little preview of our patron shows right there. that's our little detours we do on those shows usually. But
I decided to throw some more out for Alice. All those Alice in Chains records just got reissued again. So
I know you've been really into them, and it's so funny because it's like I don't know, like I know those records, like I have those records memorized. So like when you kind of start talking, it's like, oh, okay, like you're just kind of. Not that you haven't heard them, but you're really just now like really going in. And so it's like,
well, I'm doing deep dives now. Like the first two especially are just like fucking incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I can always talk about Alice in Chains. They're like, they're stamped to me, the way that like Entombed is stamped to you or something, what I mean? Like what Entombed means to you, not that I don't love Entombed, but like Alice in Chains meant that for me because of just the age I discovered it or something, because it's, I don't know. Like as far as I knew, we were the first people in the middle school that were like talking about that stuff. Like I didn't know anyone else.
And that's the time of your life where you can like you're never going to be that deep into anything again.
No,
you can be more intellectual about it, but as far as like how like emotionally invested you are into that, that's kind of it.
I remember I've mentioned it a long time ago, probably when I first got the book, but there's a Chuck Klosterman book that's a collection of his essays, and he writes this essay about, I think it's Bark at the Moon. It's either Bark at the Moon or Ultimate Sin from Ozzy. And he goes, I know this record better than any record I'll ever know. Yeah. He goes, it's not my favorite record, but I know it better because I heard it at the age where like you had the time and the energy and the lack of other opportunities, and all you did was like understand that record, whether you wanted to or not, like. And I think now with the internet, it's the attention span is really not there as much anymore.
I still try to take the time to do that though, to really.
Well, I think we do, because I think we come from that memory of what it was like pre-internet, and I think like younger people just that it's not there as much. Like I just find they don't really listen to full records very often. And I just think it's the nature of the times. And I think that like maybe I don't think this generations in the future will ever know records the way that maybe we've known records as a whole. And I don't agree with you and I, but I mean like our entire generation, like even people that were not nearly as into music as people like you and I were, I bet at a certain age, like in 5th and 6th grade, they knew Bon Jovi, New Jersey, or Bon Jovi, Slippery When Wet, as and they still to this day will know that record well into their boomer or adult years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that that's just like part of that experience that doesn't really happen anymore, because nowadays
you have to really make it happen.
YouTube and they can just go from one song to another and bounce around on an artist, and they can find anything they want if they really want to find it. And so they don't have. They're not stuck with a Walkman and 3 cassette tapes for a whole summer. You know, like it's like, okay, well, I'm going to know these records really fucking well, and you have no other choice. Or, you might trade with your friends and that sort of thing. Like, oh, okay, I'll dub this for you. You dub this. But at the same time, like if you're in elementary school, which is when I started buying music, as you did as well, like that's what whatever tapes you had or whatever records you had, you just live with them,
And if you didn't get them, you needed to try to like understand them.
Yeah.
So you listen to them more.
Yeah.
Because there's like the financial entry point is really kind of, I don't think people appreciate that. Like how much, like it was my entire allowance for a couple of weeks to get a CD.
Yep.
Or like, when I was working at a fast food restaurant, it was, I was buying maybe 2 or 3 every payday, every 2 weeks or something, But that was like all I was spending my money on. I wasn't spending my money on drugs or booze or, fucking porno magazines. It was it was purely
This was our drug. Yeah.
yeah, it was purely music.
I was the same. And I think too, like, I had a point I was going to make and I just fucking lost it. Keep going. Sorry. I lost it. It was going to be kind of locked into all that. And,
I think that's something that I'm still like, doing like this year as I was going through some, emotional shit, like actually using like Paradise Lost record this year.
Yeah.
To like use that as a way to cope and to like use whatever my, emotions were at the time made that record more like prevalent and made more sense to me.
I can see that.
I still use that as not as a coping mechanism, but as like a way to like I use music more than just like passive entertainment. It's something that helps me get through things.
I mean, I had a moment, and my point I was going to say before is that I appreciate it when I studied in Italy, that I was forced to bring 100 CDs with me for 6 months. And I had to like sit and pick out what 100 were going to go with me. And those 100 that I brought over, I still have a special relationship with because they were the only thing I had for 6 months.
Pre-internet, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. But kind of getting back to kind of 2020, I mean, I had some moments still, like even now at this age, kind of like you did, where, when all the BLM George Floyd stuff was happening, I was listening to an old Kendrick song from 2011 where he's like 18 and he's talking about like getting pulled over by the police and like a neck, a dude's, stomping on his neck and stuff like that. And I just remember like a tear rolling down my face, and it was just like I was just overwhelmed with so many emotions. I mean, 2020 brought that out of a lot of people, and it was just raw and things like that. And I just remember like, damn, like that got me, because it's like they were prognosticating this and no one's been listening. No one, they continue not to listen, to stuff or whatever. And so, stuff like that grabbed me. I mean, I'll give you one just the other day, and I still can't explain it because I still haven't really sorted it out with myself. But I was making, spoiler alert, if my mom's listening to this, episode, I was making some Christmas mixes for my mom, as I do every couple of years, because she likes music and stuff, and I've gotten her into some stuff, and she really likes female vocalists and things, and so I try and tune.
She's very open to new stuff too, which is always cool.
Yeah, I got her into Annika from The Gathering, a few things here and there that she can dig on. She likes some Anathema and some of that stuff, not too heavy, but whatever. She kind of comes out of like female country, it's like her thing. But I went on like a big, and I talked about this on Facebook, and a couple of people were kind of like commiserating with me, and a couple, even Andreas, one of our biggest Patreon supporters, was like, fuck yes, man, I'm on the train with you. I went down the rabbit hole of Miley Cyrus covers, okay, for my mom, and I was like pulling them out and trying to find some cool covers, and I knew that she's been doing some newer things with like she's got a very deep voice as she's gotten older and kind of has a sultry sort of aspect to her, but it's like kind of Pat Benatar kind of aspect and stuff. But like I was listening to some of the covers that she was doing during quarantine, all this sort of stuff. And I got like this weird, I was like overwhelmed with emotion, and I don't know why. And I think it was that I have had preconceived notions, and I've even can imagine having conversations where I've told kids, like say 10 years ago, that like Miley Cyrus was terrible. And I had this like moment of like, I don't know if it was like guilt, but it was this like revelation of like, here I was like enjoying and having like kind of an emotional like experience with these covers. And like, I was proven wrong I proved myself wrong. And I felt like a sense of guilt and yet happiness and joy at the discovery that I was discovering like a true talent of somebody that I had dismissed. And it was like this weird mix. I can't, maybe it's just like the holidays and 2020 has been taxing on people, but I just had this like kind of this, like, it was like a happy, melancholy, like emotional, I don't know. It was like the same feeling I get when I watch Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And like, I get like a tear in my eye, like when John Candy's sitting in the train station. And, like, it's like a weird, like, is this happen to you as you get older? You just like have these like,
well, no, like I think a lot of it, like
menopause or something like that. That's what it felt like.
Like she was. I I didn't follow any of her stuff when she was doing, is it Disney Channel or the Hannah Montana
Hannah
shit?
Montana and stuff, but
I didn't
she
know
got,
any of
like,
that. But
massacred
then,
by the media, like, and the expectation was she was a whore, she was a drug, like, just really, they fucking tried to assassinate her
because she wasn't what they thought they wanted her to be.
And
but that's what made me
got on that train sometimes.
Kind of grab attention is a little bit is like, okay, she was doing this show for, X amount of years or whatever, but now she's like really pushing the boundaries of what, the whole Disney shit.
Sure.
The how they like
expectations of
Britney and Justin and all these people, they kind of like, cater these people into being like these perfect pop stars.
Yeah.
And she kind of did her own thing. And I have a respect for her as well. I don't really care about the music quite so much. It's more about the, like, what she's done.
Yeah.
But how she's pushed the limits of, like what people thought she was and then what she's doing now.
And that's the thing is I found myself overwhelmingly really enjoying what she was doing. And now, like, the thought of her, she's going to do like a whole like album of Metallica covers. And I heard her do like Nothing Else Matters, and it's haunting. Like, it's really, really, really good. Like, she pulls the spirit of that sort of song out or whatever. And like, Wagner wrote on there about like, on the post, he was like, yeah, her fucking Heart of Glass cover is like incredible. And like, Andreas was like, yeah, man, I'm like way on board with it. So I guess other people have like come to this, like, it's like, she's wearing like Wendy, her design logo is based off of the Plasmatics, and she's wearing like Wendy O. Williams shirts and shit.
That's
so like
great.
So I think she's like actually like the real deal of whatever she wants to be. She's not who I thought she was or whatever, And I think
what makes that even better is that like,
too,
obviously Wendy O. Williams was not popular. Like, none of that stuff is gonna make her money. She peaked early commercially, and now she's like, what's really good? What really made a difference? Like, this shit. That's what's cool about her.
That bullshit controversy that was going on like a month ago, where she like had a cover of like something that she had done, and it looked like the Emperor's Return Celtic Frost cover. And like, people were like,
I'm never on Facebook, so
exactly. But people were like losing their shit on Twitter and stuff, like, how dare she? And I was like, fuck, if this gets like 100,000 eyes on Emperor's Return cover, what
Tom G. Warrior's just gonna give her a high five.
Yeah, are you fucking kidding me?
Look at his track record, he's gonna love that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I bet you Tom Warrior thinks like the shit she's probably doing is like really interesting because it's authentic and it's from the heart, and that's all he really gives a shit about.
Yeah, exactly. All he cares about is stuff that's true.
That's it. Yeah. And so it was like, anyways, that was my recent sort of revelation, I guess. And so here we go on a Sacred Reich episode.
We haven't talked about them for about 40 minutes, but it's okay.
I know. So let's get into it. Let's this is a good side conversation. Mark and I we'll talk about our 2020 fears off mic after this. So we've got a trio of tunes. We got the Victim of Demise, which I was just kind of talking about with the kind of a lot of the rhythmic groove sort of interplay. Then it goes into instrumental song, which I decided to include, I thought, because I think it really links kind of the two songs, Victim of Demise and Ignorance. It's like a really cool kind of bonding agent a bit. And you often don't get like good instrumentals that you often, want to play. But I just think that there's a really cool bluesy kind of soloing with the guitar players. There's a really mournful sort of contemplative feel to Laid to Rest here.
There's a really big Merciful Fate vibe, I think.
That's maybe the mournful thing that I'm getting. Yeah, absolutely.
I put Testament, Metallica, Merciful Fate.
Good call on that one. I didn't even think about Merciful Fate. I sometimes forget about them as being like the influence that they are on all these bands. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think there's so much Merciful Fate and Metallica that it's like, once you figure it out, it's hard to forget for me.
That's true. Yeah. And I hear it in Metallica, absolutely, because they pronounce it so much, but and obviously in Hell Awaits and Slayer stuff as well. But I guess a band that's coming out of like a, crossover punk, I just don't think of like Merciful Fate being a puzzle piece, but you can kind of hear it there, as you say there. So
there's a lot of traditional heavy metal thrown into this record, which it throws you off a little bit, but it also makes complete sense.
Yeah, yeah. They're definitely well schooled, and you can hear that when you go back in the demo that we were playing before, that they are fully formed out the embryonic stage, and the fact that they were looking up to people like Newstead and Flotsam, they had models in terms of like what they were trying to do, and certainly Flotsam is one band that's incredibly inspired by traditional heavy metal. You know what I mean? More than a lot of thrash bands were,
as we learned last, the first episode we talked about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, then we go to Laid to Rest, and then we have Ignorance, the title track. And if you like rhythmic propulsion, this is it, man. This is, Overkill, Exodus, those bass pops that are coming out, great punk crossover vibe. I said it's savage, political, and fun all at the same time. Like it has
perfect, yeah.
all those things happening, and that's such a tough tightrope to walk, and they achieve it, I think, on a song like this. And this is another example, like what I've talked about before, where you get like the killer ending with Arnett just fucking like blasting through a solo, and then the song just cuts. It's just like perfect. So I don't know if
this whole record is like fully formed out of the gate is my like takeaway from it.
And it's almost unfortunate because I don't think the band has ever been able to even come close to matching it.
No, I don't think so either.
It's like too good. It's like Violence, right? Eternal Nightmare, just like too good right off the bat, and then it's almost like it's just disappointing afterwards, and it's not because maybe those releases wouldn't be good in their own environment, but when you compare them, it's like nope, doesn't cut it, So
yeah.
Cool. All right, well, let's do it. After a long little talk set here, let's get Victim of Demise, Laid to Rest, and Ignorance.
Ignorant demise, ignorant demise, to live. Filling the world with hate and sins, we'll have their lives give. To now is secure our future, covered in souls to blame. Bombing the world with the tools of destruction that ignorance means death. Warring on opposing nations, starvation amongst the impoverished nation. Willing of the world population, ignorance of mankind. Starting the world with the review, the mass toxic industry. Slowly killing harmless victims, whose ignorance leaves them dead. Us men grow with voice, telling ourselves to live. Within the world, hate dissension, having our lives to give. What we do now is secure to the future, we'll have ourselves to blame. Farming the world, the tools of destruction, ignorance means death. That's a month of mine. These energy takes only a matter of time. How long business or be the one blew away. Ignorant and noise getting saved in race.
That was Ignorance, Laid to Rest, and Victim of Demise. And so we're gonna kind of put a bow on this record, even though episode's not done, because I do want to come back after this next set of songs, Mark, if you're willing to. And
absolutely, always
talk a little bit about the new record a bit, and the good, the bad, the ugly, the ups and downs of what happens when you put out a record for the first time in
23 years.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of interesting. But let's talk about the good, because I think we both agree that Ignorance is the sort of, the high point of this band.
Absolutely.
And we just come out of the title track, and then we sort of enter into the kind of the second half of the record for the most part here. And this trio of tunes, Violent Solutions, Rest in Peace, and then the eponymous Sacred Reich, a pretty tight handful. Yes. Especially Violent Solutions and Rest in Peace. Those might be my two of my MVPs of the record.
I would agree with you. I've got a hot take on Rest in Peace.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's start with Violent Solutions, then we'll get to your hot take. Okay. So Violent Solutions, you get this, again, opening fucking great guitar solo, just like you heard at the end of Ignorance there. And really a great tone that Rainey kind of crafts throughout this song in terms of like the rhythm guitar. Mm-hmm. It's very simple. I said it's another simple, brilliant, but lurching main riff while the song shifts up and down with seamless tempos.
I'd say a lot of New York style thrash.
You hear a lot of Anthrax and Overkill in this tune.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Especially probably when you get to that 220 mark. Mm-hmm. And the 220 mark is people hear here is like this breakdown. And I wrote that the breakdown is so textbook, it's so predictable, but it's absolutely perfect.
It's great breakdown about 2/3.
Yep.
The dive bombs. Yeah, it's just like
Exodus Slayer dive bombs at the end. Yeah. In the solos. Yep. Mm-hmm. It's like perfect thrash. That's what this is. This is like, a quintessential thrash. So what's your hot take on this next song, Rest in Peace? Because I have a lot of notes too, but I want to hear you first.
So so it starts out with the Black Sabbath intro.
Ominous tone. Yep. That's what I wrote.
Then goes to Celtic Frost.
Okay.
Then goes to
a
Slayer.
Pocket Groove. Yep. Before just blistering pure speed and aggression. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's basically like a history lesson in extreme music.
Sure. Did you get in that Slayer part a lot of hardcore influence?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I picked up a lot of hardcore influence, especially in that like pure speed part.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens at the 2-minute mark? Because I'm curious if you noticed what I wrote. I said, then just before the 2-minute mark, you get an epic early Metallica drop out into a Nuwabum gallop. It's perfect. That's what I wrote. So they go through Black Sabbath.
Yep, a history of heavy metal in musical form.
Yep. They go through Black Sabbath, then Celtic Frost, then you kind of get the Slayer, Exodus sort of dive bomb stuff. Then around the 2-minute mark, it goes into, like I said, this kind
It actually goes backwards, into Nuwabum.
Yeah, it goes like first through like Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning backwards, then into Nuwabum, like Angel Witch and some of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, in fact, the whole middle transitions into then a melodic, I said, creator-esque solo that can't be beat. I just said the track absolutely assaults. I mean, it's just, a heavy metal lesson. I love that. What a great way of putting it. This is a fun-ass song.
I don't know if it was just like because I had like preconceived notions of what this album was going to be, but it just kind of seems like this is, there's lots of like very specific things in this album that are super important. Yeah.
No, I mean, and their reputation, as you said, precedes them to the point where like I knew that this was a band that needed attention, even if like you and I weren't really like hankering to do a Sacred Reich episode. So I figured like this forum would be the right forum to unpack them a little bit and figure out what is their place. Why do people talk so much about them? Because like I've only heard like Surf Nicaragua and American Way, and that stuff was fine, but like it didn't grab me. And then like you actually delve into all of this and you go, okay, I get now why it's what they did here that mattered so much to so many people, and it almost like banked their reputation for the rest of their career. I almost feel like they can continue to tour off of some of this ignorant stuff, and people, because of their memory of how good this record is, will still like kind of come back and see them,
Yeah, absolutely.
That's it's a weird thing. So, and then we get to Sacred Reich, the eponymous tune. And I just said it's kind of like a tune, and we've heard this on pretty much every single episode I think we've recorded of the Thrash series, built around an old Show No Mercy kind of Kill 'Em All concoction, like real early 1983 kind of Nuwabum-y thrash kind of stuff. And then you get a really cool, kind of evil, kind of mid-pace main riff. It's one of the more straightforward tunes, though. I mean, it's short and sweet.
I'd say it's the most like Nuwabum-ish of the whole album.
Yep, absolutely. So, and it doesn't end the record. There's a couple other tunes that come after, or there's one more tune, I'm sorry, Administrative Decisions, another great song. But just for time's sake, we didn't play that one. But I think this is, the second half of the record is maybe not as consistently strong as the first half. But Violent Solutions and Rest in Peace are a couple of big ass highlights that we're going to get into here. So, so I think Mark and I have said it all. So let's get into it. Let's wrap up Ignorance, and then we'll come back, say our goodbyes, and talk about what Sacred Reich's up to these days. So we got Violent Solutions, Rest in Peace, and Sacred Reich.
This is the blood of lies. Going in the pleasure, flowing in the flesh. Senses brutal beatings, psychotic lust is made. Glistening torture betrays innocent victims to my death. Breaking crashes into blood, bleeding screams just come. Tortured out, stupid shot of glass, burning eyes of hatred, all time to let me gone. Mission made destruction, multiple spots of death, return to darkened alleys to rise and kill again. Listening thoughts and the trance, innocent victims going there, breaking glass in such blood, making screams just come. imagination on the edge of life.
That was Sacred Reich, Rest in Peace, and Violent Solutions. So I guess you've already sort of clearly, stated like where you see this in the epitaph of thrash metal in this era and stuff like that. That it's up there for you. Mm-hmm. I guess the one thing is like, I don't know if I can say that this album brings a lot of like new ideas necessarily to the thrash game, but like the formula is like so perfect in bridging like clever, catchy melodies with like sharp aggression and like inspired hardcore energy. I think that's where it, like all the puzzle pieces kind of fit, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I don't know, is there anything like innovative necessarily that Sacred Reich's doing that like no one by 1987 had done? I can't really say
No,
that.
I think they just did it so perfectly. Like they took the crossover element just and refined that to the point where it's just like it feels modern when I listen to it right now.
Yeah,
It feels like almost like a retro thing. Like that's what like throughout the Power Trip thing is like they feel like when I first heard Power Trip, I was like, oh, this is just like what I love about thrash.
Sure.
And that's basically what Sacred Reich is to me.
Yeah.
At least this first record is just like the perfect, like what I love about thrash.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's one of the more fun listens, and I'm glad we got to do it because it gave me an opportunity to like really learn to appreciate this band, you know?
Yeah, I would totally agree. Like I'm really stoked that I got to be able to. I knew that there was something there, like
Sure.
years ago.
Yep.
But to be able to actually like take the time to spend 10 hours to to really get into this album.
I guess like my perception of them is like I would see like the cover to Surf Nicaragua, and I would just be like, eh.
Yeah, they didn't seem like there was anything there.
Was like, yeah, something was just like off a little bit for me, and so it's cool to go back and see how serious they were, kind of right from like the outset, you know.
Well, how great the first record is. I mean, it's just not. I haven't really. I've only gone back and listened to a little bit of the later on catalog.
Yeah.
But like the first record is just it's incredible. Like
sure.
That's if you don't have that in your thrash, repertoire, then you're missing out on something big.
Yep. And then really now the version I got of the Metal Blade version.
Does it have Surf Nicaragua on it as well?
It's got Surf Nicaragua on it, and it has the Draining You of Life demo. So you get really like most of the stuff you would want. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
I've been trying to.
Oh wait, no, mine doesn't have Surf Nicaragua. I'm sorry. The version that's on Spotify has Surf Nicaragua, but the version I picked up has kind of a new cover. The new cover reminds me
that
more
brownish one.
Yeah, it's like Scum. It kind of looks like Napalm Death Scum. Yeah. It's cool. I dig it. I dig it as much as the other one because it kind of. And then you've got the gas mask guy in the back, and it has the Metal Massacre track as a bonus track, and then it has all of the Draining You of Life demo, which for me, that's all I need. I don't need Surf Nicaragua or The American Way. I'd get them, but it's not like essential to me. Well,
I was looking to get the first one. It's like, it's $50 just for the original.
Did Metal Blade reissue this on vinyl? Do you know? Because this
I just don't. It's worth it to get the original cover to me.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I get it. Yep, makes sense. The original cover is pretty iconic.
Yeah. And
speaking of the original cover, Brian Amos is the guy that did it, and they bring him back to do the art and the layout for their comeback record.
For Awakening?
Which is where we're going to sort of end with. So it's kind of cool. So it's kind of circular. And I think he did some of the stuff into the like early 90s, but I don't know if he did everything that they did like up through like 96 or so. Mm-hmm. And 96 was their last kind of full-length record. And then they've gone on various hiatuses and come back to do tours and different things like that. But this new lineup on Awakening, basically it's Phil Rind, Arnett, and then they bring back a guy who had drummed with them in the early 90s we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Dave McLean from Machine Head. And then they bring in a 24-year-old rhythm guitarist by the name of Joey Radzewell. All right. And
sometimes you got to go that young.
Yeah, exactly, to kind of inspire you. And so the whole thing kind of came about. I'll share with you some cool things from the Revolver interview. But they basically, are asking him, how did the first thing that kind of happened is they did a split with Iron Reagan in like 2018, I think, or 2017. And they asked him, how did this come about? He said, well, so, he goes, this is with Phil. He says 10 or 15 years ago, Municipal Waste were in Phoenix, and I took my kids. My kids were in their teens at the time, and I thought it would be a fun show. So I took my son, and I went up and introduced myself to him. That's when I met Tony Foresta, the singer. After that, we played on this cruise with them in Mexico City, and we've known each other. When I told Tony we were making a record, he's like, make sure you save a single for a split with Iron Reagan. So that's when they cut a song. I don't know if you got a chance to I didn't put it in the playlist or anything, but it's called Don't Do It, Donnie, the name of it. And he says, it kind of came in my sleep. The lyrics just came real fast, and I thought it would be perfect. It's like a little punk rock song. We recorded like 5 minutes, it's just about attitude. That song is less angry lyrically, more like imploring Donald Trump not to fuck everything up beyond recognition, Don't do it, man. My feelings about him are complicated. From a pure standpoint, I feel bad for him. I have a lot of compassion because I know he's probably suffering a great deal. I mean, have you ever worked at a job where you really were in over your head and you had no idea what you're doing? It's a terrible feeling. That's his life every day.
Yeah.
But he also possesses an ego that won't let him admit that to himself. So he must have an incredible amount of inner turmoil, and it's really problematic. We're in a very awkward time right now, and everything that's going on with the investigation. So this is back when the Russia stuff was still kind of prominent when this interview came out, and how certain people characterize the findings. He says, I made it my business to read all 400 pages of the Mueller report. And I know what General William Barr said is not the truth. Hopefully we get the truth. Pay attention enough to realize that the truth is and not be swayed. It's right there. Just read it for yourself if you really care. I have some friends that are Trump supporters who are like, you hate him. I don't hate anybody. I certainly don't hate him, but I think he's kind of an awful human being. He's an example of how your life becomes when you're a narcissist and all that matters is your ego, your pocketbook, and what you can get out of everything. This is the example of what life looks like when your only motivation is selfish things. That's the opposite of how we should actually strive to be. The Dalai Lama always says that the best way to cherish yourself is to cherish others. And that's the thing. The idea is if you do things for yourself, you're limited to one thing. And if you do things for others, there's no limit to what you can do for other people. And so I just thought it was cool because, this is a band that's, super political, obviously. And, he's now kind of discovered, Buddhism at this point, and he's kind of mellowed out. And, he says, he has 20 years of practice have mellowed him out. He says, I was a raging ego, selfish piece of shit, crappy human. That's his quote. And he says, in a way that it's reflected in this kind of new record, right? That the new record, I don't know how much you listen to it outside the two songs I kind of put on here, but
yeah, just a couple.
It's a heavy metal record. It's not a thrash record anymore. And that's maybe okay for a band that's in their 50s, or probably pushing, early mid 50s.
He's in his mid 50s probably.
And it comes back to that question I asked you at the very beginning is like, is it vital can you be a Buddhist and be a meditative kind of calm person and still like make like vital sort of metal? So, I mean, I guess what's your take on that? Do you have a thought just based on what you heard off Awakening?
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's not, it doesn't, blow my mind. It's not like, the first Memoriam record or something, or it doesn't. It's okay. Is all I can really say about it.
Yeah, that's my feelings. It's like it's more traditional. Parts of it reminded me of some of like the last couple Anthrax records. Even though I like the Anthrax records better than Awakening. But it's like I feel like they're maybe heading in, how Anthrax is kind of all but abandoned thrash, which is fine because they're good at writing non-thrash songs too. They have some of that in their
they got the guitar player from what's that fucking band? Shadows Fall.
Yeah. Yep. They got some new lifeblood in them a little bit too. So I mean, like Divide and Conquer has some kind of thrash elements. I picked it because it's one of the more thrashy songs on the record. It's got some pretty decent sort of solo work, but to me, it like kind of just reminds me like almost like mid-pace, like Armored Saint, or I'm getting the vibe from Phil's like vocals now of like Iced Earth, kind of.
Yeah, the Armored Saint thing kind of hits home. It was like it seemed kind of like very mild Armored Saint.
Yeah, exactly. It's not as like I like the new Armored Saint more than I like this new Sacred Reich, But I mean, the lyrics in Divide and Conquer are pretty spot on. I mean, it's like a perfect encapsulation of like America 2020, like the stuff you and I have been talking about, the sort of divisions that exist and how arbitrary a lot of them are, created by the media or whatever, political parties, things like that.
Yeah.
And then you get Killing Machine, which will end with Divide and Conquer and Killing Machine. Killing Machine's got some kind of like, you detect a little bit more the crossover, some of those punkish elements. It's pretty catchy. I think Killing Machine's one of the better tunes on the new record. But overall, like I said, I wanted to kind of highlight it, just because it is rare that a band comes back that we've been talking about and tries to put out, something that's kind of relevant. The reception on this, I think there were some good reviews, but I think there are also some people that kind of wanted a thrash record. And I just don't think that that's where Phil's at. And I don't know. Yeah. I guess that's okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a song on there I should have maybe picked, even though it's not really thrashy. But like, there's a song, if you get a chance, I think it's like their best kind of traditional song is a tune called Salvation. And, if they decide to go in that direction, if they actually put out something in the future, hell, it took them 23 years to get this out. So who knows? I wouldn't be unhappy with it. I think that could be actually a cool place to go. And maybe they shouldn't try to do too much thrash because it's just not where they're at, and Phil's mellow.
They've actually done a really good Priest cover for Rapid Fire.
Yeah, it's great.
That's like he screams like Halford.
Was that Rapid Fire?
I think that was on the
Surf
Nicaragua EP.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
They do Rapid Fire and
Sweet Leaf.
Yep.
Sabbath. Yeah. I was playing along on the drums with that.
Oh, really? Nice. That's pretty sweet. Yeah, so I don't know. Like, I guess, we're going to end with a couple of tunes from Awakening, but 2019, good for them. I'm glad that they're kind of getting back out there because their last two full lengths, like even looking at like how they were received on Metallium, were not super great. They was a Heel in '96, and then especially Independent didn't do so hot. I kind of remember Independent being at the record store. I remember that.
I don't remember that at all.
If you look at the cover, I just kind of remember seeing it in the used bin and shit like that. It's nothing like I ever listened to, but
sure.
By '93, I was definitely into other shit.
Yeah.
So, and I never had a pass with this band to like be interested in checking them out. I do remember the American Way CD being kind of used sometimes. So with the Statue of Liberty and stuff, but anyways, that's kind of where we're at. And so good for them. They made it to 2019 and judge for yourself with these next couple tunes. I think there are some bands of this era that are putting out some reasonably new examples of great records. Armored Saint, we just mentioned. Surprisingly, Joe Schaefer tuned me into the new Onslaught British thrash band. It's actually really good. I was never into like as much of the old Onslaught, but I have them on the countdown, the History of Heavy Metal countdown. So I've kind of gotten a taste of them. They're pretty good. They're not like mind blowing. And then a band that we are going to be featuring in our third Patreon show, Heathen. Their new record is actually really good, like surprisingly good. And so, I'm kind of curious what you think about that as you kind of delve into that realm of Heathen in the next couple of weeks. But
I will be doing that tomorrow.
There you go. Yeah. So don't shy on their new one. It's good. So, but So any closing thoughts on Sacred Reich as we kind of start to wrap things up here?
Well, I think that anybody that doesn't own Ignorance should go out and grab it. I think that's a completely essential thrash record, especially in the modern context of power trips and municipal waste and
Iron Reagan,
that type of vibe.
Yep, without a doubt. So even like there's parts of like Toxic Holocaust that I can like definitely tell that they were Reich fans and stuff like that. So
and I'm glad that's as we keep doing these shows that I'm glad that I keep being proven wrong. I thought this band was stupid when I was younger, and now I listen to it, I was like, this is fucking perfect.
Sure.
This album is fantastic. Yeah.
One of the things I want you thinking about, because when we do our part 10, which will spoiler, will be forbidden, and we'll probably be joined by our good friend Chris, who will be home for the holidays, so we'll be in contact with each other. But I'm going to kind of come to you and get you thinking about it. So I'm going to kind of prepare my little list, and maybe I'll kind of text you a couple of questions to just sort of have prepared. But, which of the thrash bands was the biggest surprise that we've done in this journey? Like just kind of reflecting on this like 10-part journey in terms of, ones that you think you're going to kind of walk away listening to the most, like in the future, and ones that like defied your expectations the most, or ones you think you'll go back to for, you still are trying to kind of crack the nut, and but you think you'll go back and digest. It's just something I've been thinking about, as I'm reflecting on this journey as well, so.
Well, I think initially, Sacred Reich and Snow White.
Okay, cool.
Those are my initials as far as, this show is concerned.
Cool. All right. I like it. Well, we'll see if it changes.
And maybe some, Cyclone Temple.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Don't tell Chris that. We'll both
just got my reissue. So
yeah, I know. I saw you. You texted me that. Chris did say he's willing to sit down and rock out some Cyclone Temple.
Yeah, I talked to him a couple days ago about it as well.
He's like, warming.
I need to listen to that again. It's like, it's good. It's good.
We got to hit him with great. So we got to hit him from the Eastern Front and the Western Front. It's got to be like Germany, just get pinned in. And he's got nowhere to go but to like listen to us sometimes. So
yeah.
But yeah, let us know what you thought. We've been getting a lot of really good feedback on the Thrash episodes. You can leave us a rating on Apple Music. We appreciate that. Obviously, subscribe to us on Apple Music, any podcasting sort of feed, or Spotify. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com, or you can check us out on Facebook. That's where I've been kind of getting a lot of messages from people, Jason and Mark, or on Twitter, Requiem Metal Podcast, or on Instagram, Requiem Metal Podcast. And, certainly if you would like to become a Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/Requiem Podcast, or go to requiemmetal.com to find our old episodes. So if you're new to our podcast and you're wondering where to find the first 100+ episodes that we've done, that's the place to get them. And there you can click on the Patreon link and sign up, and you can get a bunch of our bonus episodes. I would say, what do you think, 40, 50 hours probably at this point that we've sort of thrown together for Patreon stuff?
Oh yeah, close. Easily.
So hey, you got nothing to do over Christmas break and you need more Requiem in your life, that's the place to do it. So, and we would appreciate the Christmas gift of your Patreon money, because we think we deserve it. I think we're doing great work, and we're hitting a stride of consistency that is almost unmatched by most.
This is probably the most deep, as far as the deep dives go. This is the most we've actually deep dived into stuff.
Yeah.
Outside of just like saying here's the bands, like I think we've really spent a lot of time with these bands.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think the last probably 3 years we've probably done the most like the best analysis that we've ever done.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think when I go back and I look at like where, upon reflecting, there's definitely sort of a transition that started to happen. Probably, I don't know. It was probably, what kicked it off, I feel like, was maybe like those Neurosis episodes, The Sun That Never Sets.
Yeah.
And I think we did some pretty deep diving with the Uli John Roth, but then we really, really peeled apart that Neurosis record. And
I think we both kind of felt like, I don't know, like we came out the other side of something after that.
Yeah, no, it was like a spiritual, exactly.
Yeah, spiritual awakening.
Something, And then that led us into the proto-metal thing. And I think the proto-metal thing, like, at least I felt like I had to show up with like some chops. I had to like kind of, like, if we were going to do this and we were going to try and do it right, like I had to know what the fuck we were kind of talking about and bring the research in. And I think we just kind of rode that wave, right through episode 200. And then, from the stuff we did with Mike, with Peter Green and Allman Brothers, to like that German metal stuff with Chris, Tribulation, that 4-part Greek history. Even like Slint and Kiss, which were like fun episodes. They were kind of off.
Got a lot of nice Slint comments.
Yeah, and people love that Kiss that Kiss episode, and stuff. So yeah, it's been fun, and I don't see it changing. I think this is kind of this ingrained in kind of how we're going to approach this. So I did create something because I saw Martin Popoff doing it, but I didn't really get much response from it. Have you seen like the little link you can create where people can like buy you a coffee? Have you seen that before?
No.
Yeah, Martin Popoff sort of used it, and I noticed like he was getting some good like responses from it, but I kind of pitched it out a couple times on Facebook just for maybe somebody that's like doesn't want the commitment of Patreon. Maybe they have commitment issues. But they'd like to, give us like a one-time, like, $3 donation, and I figure, like a couple bucks from a couple, from a bunch of our listeners, be like a nice little injection. But I don't know if people are seeing it on the Facebook page. I don't know. So maybe I'll send you the link to throw up on the website. That way, if maybe people don't want to commit to Patreon, but they'd like to go to the website and just, click on a thing. And
sometimes Facebook doesn't like, people to
the
see
algorithms. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'll do that. So if you're interested, but maybe you don't want the commitment of Patreon, doing a monthly, but you'd like a one-time kind of donation. Hey,
we've had several people that like to do that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's awesome. We had one of our Patreons, Luke Walker, do it that way. He just kind of sent us a big gift, and so we're happy to do that. If you want to do that, get a hold of us on requiempodcast@gmail.com, and we'll give you all the proper links that we have. So for Requiem Metal Podcast I almost said sacrilege. I don't know why. Sacred Reich.
Sacrilege at some point.
Yeah, down the road when we do our Canadian part. So we got Divide and Conquer and Killing Machine as we sort of close things out. So enjoy from the 2019 record Awakening. And so for the podcast, I am Jason.
And I'm Mark.